you please stand and join the board in saying the Pledge of Allegiance?
You did.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Tonight we have one very, very special recognition. We are honoring our latest recipient of the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching. May I welcome Dr. Patrick Shelton, principal at our Hannah Woods Elementary School.
Good evening, President Jacob, Vice President Sortino, Dr. Marty, Mrs. Stover, and members of the board. Tonight, I'm very proud to be here to recognize and honor Liesl Ferzola, fifth grade teacher at Hannah Woods Elementary School, as a recipient of the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching. Liesl is the second teacher in Parkway to receive this award, joining Ruth Knope, who's also in the audience this evening, teacher at Parkway West High School and 2015 recipient. Liesl actually started her educational career in Parkway as a Parkway student, graduating from Parkway South High School and then WashU before starting her teaching career in Illinois. After 2 years in Champaign, Liesl and her husband moved to Connecticut, where she continued teaching at Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut. And then while in Connecticut, she also served as a STEM coach and math coach in Newtown and Danbury. The Presidential Award for Excellence in Math and Science is given annually to outstanding K-12 science and math teachers from across the country. This year, 213 winners were selected by a panel of distinguished scientists, mathematicians, and educators following an initial selection process at the state level. This year's awardees were composed of two cohorts, which was unique this year, one from K-6th grade teachers and one from 7th through 12th grade teachers, representing all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, U.S. territories, and the Department of Defense Education Activity Schools. In addition to attending recognition ceremonies last week in Washington, D.C., Liesl was given a $10,000 award from the National Science Foundation to be used at her discretion. Liesl, tonight we congratulate you for achieving this amazing accomplishment. We want to thank you for what you've done for students and teachers in Illinois, Connecticut, and now Missouri, and we especially want to welcome you home to Parkway. Congratulations.
Do you want me to shake? We're going to come shake.
Do we want to take a brief break?
Yeah.
after this?
I don't think we need to, do you?
I think Nikki wanted that. I'd like to at least get through this statements before we take a break.
We don't even need to, do we? Unless we need to. I mean,
I just wanted to say just a couple of words. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to come here tonight and for you guys to honor me. I really appreciate it and am humbled, I guess, by the opportunity to come before you, especially since this is just my first year back teaching in Parkway. So I appreciate that you guys are, sharing this experience with me. So last week, as Patrick said, I had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C., and as a part of that, there was some different professional development that we focused on. A lot of it was focused on active learning, so really working on making sure that our students are engaged in the classroom. And then another focus really was on making sure that we were giving science opportunities to our students at an early age. And the reason why that's so important is because when they looked at scientists that were, had jobs as scientists, what really hooked them in was opportunities that happened in the schools or in the community for them early on. That's what kind of put them on the track to get into science. And we know that there are so many more STEM-related jobs that are going to be coming into our country over, the next several years, and we want to make sure that our students are prepared for that and that have that opportunity. And so by providing those experiences, we can do that. So a lot of our PD kind of focused on that. We also had the opportunity to go to the Smithsonian Zoo. We had an awards dinner there, and then we were able to take a tour of the White House as part of our experience. Then after that, my family and I took an opportunity to just explore DC and to see, what our capital of, our country has to offer, which was a great experience, for my family as well. So thank you again for honoring me tonight. I really appreciate it.
Unlike Ruth, you did not get to shake the president's hand.
I did not, and I'm not bitter at all about it. No, even though I waited 2.5 years, not bitter at all. Yes, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thanks.
We really are proud of these teachers. I had a personal witness with Ruth, who taught my grandson and brought him out of the doldrums of algebra and helped him to realize some of the potential he had. And I think both of you are well deserving of the award you received. So thank you again, and to all of our outstanding teachers. 6.0, additions, corrections, and modifications to the agenda. 6.01, addition to the agenda item 11.04, approval of personnel items. 6.02, addition of agenda item 12.01, rescind the approval of resolution to reset 2016 tax rate levy. 7.0, citizen statements. I'll call your name and ask you to come forward. May I remind you, too, that this is to be directed to the board, and sometimes there's a desire to mention names, but I have to remind you that because of FERPA laws, the federal laws, and that we cannot mention names of individual students because of what that involves. But that being said, our first person, you'll have 3 minutes, Grayson Jost, to be followed by Andrew Bennett and Lee Guardina.
Good evening, board, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name is Grayson Justice. I live in 1813 Highland Green Drive in O'Fallon, Missouri. I'm a member of the Gateway, member of Grow American Youth. Last month, the board decided to approve the sex education for LGBT students, and I was applauded for that. But there were some storm clouds in here last month. People who oppose. There may be still people here now. I want you to make your promise that you keep the sex education that you made, and I hope that all schools will have this kind of sex education class in every school, because I was in middle school, I was questioning my sex education. And I didn't know who I was until in high school that turns out I was gay. I didn't learn from any teachers. I didn't learn from my parents because I was so scared. I learned by myself. I want the school to have a great LGBT protection for these students. And I want everyone to be equal. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Andrew Bennett and Lee Guardina.
Quick question. Is it possible for two other members of the GSA to just come up here for us, with us? No? Okay.
Not of this, it's the ones that have signed up.
All right. Okay. Hi, I know you don't know me, but I'm Andrew Bennett. I go to Parkway Central High School. I've never been to a board meeting before, but so I'd just like to come up and say thank you to each and every one of you, even the ones who said no last year. I know that you all have put great time and great effort into this education, and I just wanted to say thank you. And I know that this has been a rough time. It's been a very, very, very long time coming, but I know that together we are a stronger Parkway, and we will move forward together as a stronger Parkway and a safer Parkway because of this education. And
All right, I am Lee Gardunia. I actually have never been to a board meeting before, but like it's amazing. I've seen like so much community involvement in this whole spiel of events. But I think the question we need to be asking ourselves is like, what now? Like we've accomplished this, but there's so much more that we can do to help students in Parkway to make themselves more comfortable here in the school and to raise awareness for different issues, whether that be like LGBT issues or like if you're a non-English speaking student, and just making sure that every kid has a voice and encouraging future involvement in things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You will each receive a letter acknowledging your statement.
They're not saying their address.
Oh, I'm sorry. It is 215 Runnymede.
that's mine. I didn't know theirs.
And Lee, maybe if you would see Nikki afterwards and make sure she has your address so we can correspond. And also Grace and Jost, yours is 1813 Highland Green Drive. All right, thank you very much. 8.0, approval of agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for the regular meeting of the Board of Education scheduled for September 14th, 2016?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye. The motion carries 7-0. 9.0 resolutions, there are none. 10.0 communications. 10.01 calendar of meetings. The annual tax rate hearing will be held on Wednesday, September 28th, 2016 at 6:30 p.m. here at Central Middle, ahead of the 7 p.m. regular board meeting. An anticipated closed session will be held at 5:30 p.m. 10.02 board liaison reports. Does anyone have visits or things they'd like to report to the board?
I had just a quick comment and a question for Lisa. Is Lisa here today?
She left.
Oh, she left, okay. They had a really good night for the sex ed, and I think people really enjoyed the thorough.
I'm sorry, Lisa, I thought you said about Lisa.
Lisa Meredith.
Sorry about that.
Oh, she's back to
There she is. So it was really good work by you and Ron and the admin. It was very nice, I think very informative. There was only one thing that I noticed, and you guys don't have to answer me now, but later on is there was a reference to this organization called Center for Sex Ed. And I just want to make sure that you guys check and see if that has any connection with the Planned Parenthood, because otherwise it would be a violation of the Missouri law. So just to kind of cross-check on that one. Thank you.
Any other liaison reports? I know we had a bunch of stuff that we did, but
Dr. Sortino and I attended the first Project Parkway Steering Committee meeting.
Just want to compliment Desi Kirchhoffer for the organization of the meeting. And basically, we're in Project Parkway 2.0. And it's going to be exciting. There's some revisions in terms of how the goals are structured. However, we are moving forward with it. And I've said this before, strategic plans in most cases seem to happen. They're approved and they sit on the shelf and nothing happens. And we ought to be very, very proud at Parkway in terms of the past several years, 5 to 6 years, that we started Project Parkway and have accomplished so much, and we never have let it go. And it's just the fabric of the district, and goals are accomplished. So much is accomplished for our students because of it. So congratulations. It's great, and it's exciting to get into this new era.
And it's been an amazing experience. Dr. Sortino and I were charter members of the group. We're among the few that have hung in there. How many years? I had lost count.
Starting
09.
Wow.
We haven't changed a bit. But it's really been rewarding work.
Thank you very much. Any other liaison reports? Thank you. 10.04, there are some upcoming subcommittee meetings that I'll remind you about. The Project Parkway Quarterly Meeting is this next Monday at South High School. It'll start at 6:30 p.m. and it'll be a wonderful meeting where we learn some more about how these goals fit together. There's also the Teaching, Learning, and Accountability Subcommittee meeting, September 21st at 3:30 p.m. at the ISC building.
Excuse me? I thought it was 4:15, the most recent communication okay.
All right, somewhere between 3:30 and 4:15 at ISC. And then finally, the HR Finance Subcommittee meeting, those of you that are on that subcommittee, it meets September 27th at 3 p.m. at the admin building. And 11.0, action items. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented in the September 14th, 2016 board materials?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Is there anything to be pulled to action or closed? Then all in favor? Aye. Are there any opposed or abstentions? The motion carries 7-0. Well, we haven't moved this quickly in a while. 12.0 action items. This is 12.01. I'll call on Patty Bedborough to come and talk to us about rescinding the approval of the resolution to reset the 2016 tax rate levy.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the addition of this item to the board agenda today. You may recall in past history, on even years when we're setting the tax rate, we have a resolution to reset our voluntary rollback. So in previous years, we've always done that at the same board meeting as the tax rate hearing. In 2014, you may recall that there was a slight error of a few cents, and then we had to call a special meeting to then reset that rate. So this year, in preparation for that, to ensure that that did not happen again, we actually prepared the resolution for the rollback, and that was board approved last month. So while checking with the state auditor, going through all the reports, confirming that our numbers for our beginning tax rate were in line, discovered that their reports actually were going to drop our rate to 3.83 when it should have been 3.9667. So working through, waiting for their legal review of the situation, today got final confirmation that our option in order to remain at the same tax rate, so the same tax rate that we ended last year with, no gain in revenue, no loss in revenue, we could rescind this resolution to reset our tax rate. The penalty to us, if we do not rescind this resolution, we lose essentially $3.5 million in tax dollars. So essentially, it took a residential rate of the 3.996 and lowered it to 3.8373. The state auditor's comments were that they have seen this happen this year in the calculator among districts that had a lot of new construction. Now, we did have new construction in our residential rate last year. It was over $9 million, but we also have residential property of $2.7 billion. So as a percent, that's 0.03%. So that's not a large amount. So I'd ask you to consider rescinding that resolution.
Are there any questions for Patty from the board? Kim, did you? No? My understanding, if I can ask, is that really because the way they've set up the calculation, that we're not getting any money, we're not losing any money. It's just putting us where we are because of the manner in which they calculate it. If we don't do that,
Then we would lose 3.5 million.
so it's not 3.5 million that we're losing, or that somehow it's what we always had. But we're just making sure that by doing this, the calculation is done as it always has been done.
Correct. So we're keeping the rollback, with rescinding this, we'll keep the rollback rate the exact same, which is 0.2383 on the residential rate. And that calculates to about $6.4 million. So when going through the calculation, we had revenue in operating of essentially 166 million on their calculator. We would have had 6.4 million from the rollback, so about 173 with change, $1 million. When you're looking at the calculation and then they utilize the 3.83 rate, that brought the revenue down to 169. So there's where the disparity of the 3.5 million was.
Okay. Any other questions? Or then, may I have a motion and a second that the Board of Education rescind the approval of the resolution to reverse the voluntary residential rate and the voluntary commercial rate rollbacks and adopt the tax rate ceiling as presented to serve as the starting points in the calculation of the 2016 operating tax rates? So moved. Roll call, Nikki, please.
Mrs. Applebaum? Yes. Mrs. Feldman? Yes. Mrs. Hopper? Mrs. Mogerman?
Yes.
Mr. Rathode?
Yes.
Dr. Ciartino? Mr. Jacob?
Yes, the motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Patty.
Thank
I know
you.
you're excited. Otherwise, we'd have been looking at somehow to do cuts,
Yes.
and that's not necessary. Thank you.
You're welcome.
13.0 policy review. Tonight, there are none. 14.0 reports, and you're right where you need to be. Fund balance and recruitment.
Good evening once again. I think you will be pleased to hear the information that will be presented to you this evening. A great deal of things fell into place last year, and I'm very pleased to present the financial results to you. I turned it on now. So our operating revenues to begin with. If you look compared to budget, we actually fell short of our target by 2.3 million. So it is actually a deficit of 0.99%, so essentially 1%. Our final collection rate for taxes was at a 95.62%. We budgeted at 96.75. So hence why we have some recoupment money. We had some settlement of protested taxes. Prop C funded at a higher rate than we budgeted, so good news that the statewide sales tax collections were increased. Other local revenues includes increases from financial institution tax of about $752,000, but it's partially offset by a decrease in M&M surtax. Countywide, we had an increase in state assessed utilities, and it's offset by slightly lower county stock tax. In state revenues, we had lower formula monies collected, about $113,000 lower. Adult education state funding was decreased from state sourcing. However, that revenue was actually included in federal. So each year that varies at the last minute where they fund it from, either state sources or federal sources, but the total funding essentially stayed the same. And then our federal funds, our drop was increase in the adult ed, but lower funding from Title I, Title II, and Title III. But the title program funding was based on our lower spending. So we only receive that funding as we're spending those funds. So we'll see that expenditure pickup on those title funds also. And when you're looking at transportation reimbursements, less the SSD rates, and it's less SSD routes, sorry about that, and less fuel costs resulted in the lower amount that we were refunded from SSD. So when we look at that compared to our next year budget, we still believe that we will meet these targets. Of course, once we set the tax rate, we will be bringing forth a revised budget that includes a revised property tax number also. But certainly, when we're comparing this year's results with next year's, we don't see big fluctuations. Remember, when you're looking at that property tax number and you see the decrease from the actual of fiscal year 16 to the projected in fiscal year 17, remember we had the recoupment of the $6 million that was included in our fiscal year 16 property taxes. Operating expenses. Certainly we have a great story to tell here. Overall, we had expenditure savings of $7.63 million versus the budget. We knew that we had anticipated savings of the $3.3 million, so over and above that, we had an additional $2.2 million that is attributed to those items that are budgeted in fiscal 16 and then have been requested to be carried over as future budgets in fiscal year 17. We also have an increase in student activity balances, so that's part of course, our district finances. And so overall, then we have another savings that was essentially unprojected of $2.1 million. So you may ask, okay, what are those line items that makes that up? So certainly salary savings we had from partial vacant positions during the year as replacements were hired, not necessarily immediately once a vacancy was open. And we also have some dock pay from some long-term absences. Benefits, some of the savings were a combination of the health, dental, vision, life fund of $358,000. Workers' comp, we had a savings of $157,000. Retirement, a savings of $172,000, and Social Security Medicare of $294,000. So as we see these budget savings, we're able to then revise some of our formulas that we'll use for future budgets also. Purchase services, some of the savings is mostly from development, so Title II budget, and other district consulting, repairs, et cetera. Supplies and materials, we had a large chunk of savings from that. Fuel for the buses, $251,000, quite a savings. Textbooks, $424,000. Majority of that is being carried over into next year. Food service food, we saved $651,000. Energy costs, $857,000. And of course, we saved on school supplies as well. When we're looking at as far as operating expenditures as we finish 16, going and comparing that to our fiscal year 17, we do have an increase of the estimated 2.69%. Majority of that increase is from our increases in salaries. Now that we have our rehires, our new hires, and all of our employees essentially in place, when we're doing the revised budget, we'll look at all of the current employees, their salaries, and make some slight adjustments to those budgeted numbers. So then putting it all together, it brings us to the drum roll of our fund balance. So this past year, we have ended with a 19.22% fund balance. We projected to be just over 18% at 18.25%. So the exceptional savings in the expenditures helps double because, of course, the calculation for that fund balance percentage takes in that total expenditure number as part of the equation. So next year, you'll see that the fund balance, as it's currently budgeted, actually is a decrease. But as we're doing the revised budget, we'll redo the revenues, we'll relook at the expenditures, and we'll make those adjustments. So we think that's just a temporary blip on there. So when we're looking at one of our favorite new slides that has been created, we do see that substantial growth, and then you'll see in 17 where it flattens up just a little bit of a dip, and then we do project out still our 0.25% balance growth. Any questions so far? All right, I'll continue. So our 5-year,
So in
FY17 budget, the operating revenues are projected to go down, and maybe you address that, but why are we projecting operating revenues to go down?
So currently, we're projecting those to go down because included in FY16 was a $6 million recoupment, one-time rate that we took on the residential rate. That was a recoupment that was available for that last time. Those revenues are not duplicated in FY17.
Okay,
So it's just the growth of the 0.7% CPI and the tax rate of the 97%.
Okay, thank you.
Betty, also I noticed there was a two cut from, one from federal, which was about 10 point something cut, and state, which was 4 point something. What is that? What that means to us?
The,
On the first page, there was on the budget. Let me go back to that one real quick.
on the budget for 17,
Yes.
in federal,
Federal, there was a deduction or a cut of 10% something, and on the state, it was a 4 point.
So-
4.65, yeah. It's operating revenues.
is in comparison. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so what I had mentioned in there is the decrease in state funding was, originally we had budgeted for part of the adult education program to come in as state funding, and it flipped. It came in mostly as federal funding, so we didn't necessarily lose funding. It just changed the category, so the object code that it's posted to. And federal funding overall decreased by that 720,000, and it was a combination of the increase in revenues based from the adult education offset from the decreases for the Title I, the Title II, and the Title III. And those weren't necessarily decreases in funding, they were essentially decreases in the amount that we expended, so it decreases the amount of revenue that we receive. Most likely, we do have some carryover funds that we don't necessarily lose those federal funds, they just carry over to a budget in that next year. But there's different federal rules on when you can carry over and when you can't.
Thank you, Patty.
All right. So here, when we look at our 5-year forecast for our revenues, once again, we will be revising this before we present the budget assumptions to you in December. Currently, we're looking at that overall growth of about 1.7, 1.6 each year for revenues. You may notice some lines in here, like the VST. We are forecasting that gradual decrease in VST tuition. That correlates with our current estimate of enrollment decrease, where we'll have greater amounts of graduates from the VST program than we will have new enrollees in future years. So this year is the exception. We actually will be most likely adjusting that revenue number because our enrollment was actually higher than we initially anticipated. When we're looking at local property tax revenue growth in future years, we're looking at an annual increase of 1.5% a year, combination of some new construction and keeping that CPI of a 0.7. We are hopeful that the CPI increases over that. Also, Prop C revenues, we're looking at an increase annually of about 2.8%, or about $5 per weighted ADA. Federal revenue, we're essentially keeping the same. Other local and earnings on investments, we have an annual increase of about 3% a year, and the remaining revenues are essentially currently as budgeted. So that overall increase of about 1.5 to 1.7 per year. When we're looking at our expenditures and how, you know, our last year actuals then compare to our future estimates, we have future salary increases of a 0.9%. So this is based on an increase in salaries less some turnover savings from new hires, et cetera. We also have benefit increases of approximately 2.1%. So it assumes an increase, of about 4% each year, less the turnover savings. Purchase services, we're looking at about a 0.5% annual increase. Supplies, we're essentially putting flat, and also debt service and the student activities. So some of our concerns are for the capital projects fund balance. I know we've talked about this, the need for future transfers from operating funds into capital projects. So as that need begins to truly surface is in that 17-18 year when we have a new need to purchase buses again. So in 2014, we purchased 30 CNG buses, and that essentially was about 3 years worth of funding for our fleet turnover. So we've had the last few years without a purchase of fleet, so now we're looking at a purchase of about 10 to 12 buses in 17-18. So as we're looking at the operating fund forecast, you can see the need for the transfer of the approximately $1.425 million in 17-18 in order to capture the cost and cover the cost of the bus purchase. We do see initially the slight decrease in the fund balance for next year, but like I mentioned previously, we believe with the revised budget that those amounts will improve and will actually show that at least a 0.25% growth. And in the future years, then we do have the 0.25% fund balance growth as projected. Our biggest challenge is going to be recouping some of the revenues that are lost from the VST program when we know that necessarily the enrollment fluctuations in the classrooms specifically won't necessarily allow us to lower FTE immediately. So one of the ideas that we have with recoupment, our preliminary calculations, I'm still waiting the final amount from the state auditor, but I do have a verbal that these are the amounts. On our commercial rate, we're able to recoup $3,145,000. Essentially, that means approximately 0.2795 on the commercial rate. On the residential rate, we are able to recoup $711,000. Essentially, that means 0.0261 on the residential rate. So a preliminary total of $3,856,000. So the impact on the tax rate, on the residential rate, if we look at that just individually, our past recoupment, the value of that was 0.2374. So as we look into this year, we will have a lower rate right off the bat because we're not going to be duplicating that recoupment. And the current tax rate is undetermined at this time because St. Louis County is going to release all their assessed valuations, et cetera, during next week. So we'll know more about what our current estimated residential rate is when we set the rate on the 28th. But just looking at how the tax rates would lay out if everything else remained the same, last year in the residential rate, we levied 3.9717. Remember, that included the recoupment of the 0.2374. We have a possible recoupment of the 0.0261. That would then give a potential new rate for residential of 3.7604. Agricultural rate, so that's essentially the farms or the golf courses that exist in our district. There would be an estimated no change to that rate. So that would remain at the 3.8917, so not touched by the recoupment. Commercial rate, currently we levy 4.1896. The recoupment would allow us to levy 0.2795, so that would move that tax rate to 4.4681. Personal property would then remain also at 3.7379. So what this change would mean to the average homeowner when they compare this year's tax bill to last year's tax bill, well, maybe not their bill, but the amount that they actually paid, would be a savings of $100 per average homeowner. Remember, last year they were billed at a much higher rate than what they actually owed. $200,000. So potential uses for recoupment. Recoupment really is for one-time purposes because it's revenue that you essentially capture at a moment in time. It doesn't automatically recur that next year. It's not a guaranteed revenue flow, so truly you shouldn't build a salary or a benefit or a lease or anything else that's long-term off of those funds. Our capital projects fund has dwindled over the last several years. And we have the future capital project needs, such as the fleet purchases. And currently, we're forecasted, if you recall, to transfer the funds beginning next year, so in 17-18. And what I would like to propose is the potential of, if you are willing to levy the recoupment of the funds, that possibly we could place those into the capital projects fund. It's one-time use funds that could be then placed into a fund that is used for essentially one-time use purchases. This would then alleviate the need on the operating balance to do the transfers until a future time when that capital projects fund is dwindled again. Building that capital funds balance will take the pressure off that general fund. Currently, we're estimating $1.4 million transfer in 17-18, escalating to about $2.5 million annually. We could also utilize the recoupment into the operating fund. It's truly up to you. I was just presenting that as an option. So really, just what I have, and just willing to hear your discussion on that.
I think I should probably know the answer for this, but why are golf courses agricultural versus commercial?
That is just what they are.
Is there any way that MSBA or somebody could lobby to have that changed? And
Absolutely. So remember, if it's a commercial property, it's market value or the assessed valuation times the 32% gives you the value for that property. Agricultural rate, I believe, is 3%. Residential rate is 19.
So we're losing a lot of money that way?
Well, potentially. I mean, we're not necessarily losing because we've never had it. It's always been agricultural.
Right. But they're not growing crops?
No.
Patty, so the questions you pose to the board, you're welcoming input, not just tonight, but in the next few weeks, and then
Absolutely.
we'll make a
Absolutely. And certainly, right now, you know, I really do need your guidance, whether it's tonight or in the next week, so that when I present at the hearing, I know that, you know, I am following what your wishes are as far as not only the recoupment that we could use. So remember, we would have 3 years to actually assess this recoupment. So it doesn't all have to take place this year. It could wait until future years. And the other thing is, I'd have to know which fund you would like that in, whether or not it's in the general fund like we did last year, or if it's your wish to put that in the capital projects fund.
This would be regarding so for capital projects not related to the bond issue. that
Correct.
Occurred,
Correct.
So we're looking for money to fund other capital projects outside of those.
And our biggest purchase right now would be the upcoming 17-18 purchase of buses.
The CNG buses,
Potentially CNG.
potentially.
So yes, we are looking toward the purchase of the CNG buses because we do have pre-approval of 9 buses, not in full cost, but essentially the gap cost between the cost of a diesel fuel bus and a CNG bus. We do have approval through the Clean Cities Act for, I believe it's $250,000 in a grant for that.
Any other questions for Patty?
I would just like Patty maybe to break some good news to the board on our bond rating.
I almost forgot,
Yes, I
sir.
know.
I don't know how I could have forgotten that. Today, we received our verbal on our tax rate, and it is, so our tax rating through, bond rating, credit rating through S&P, and it is confirmed to be a AAA again.
And maybe just quick, I mean, that just didn't happen. You had to actually go through a process. I think you and Brian participated in that.
Absolutely, and Michelle Bach, which was here earlier, our financial advisor, S&P had, yes, she's still here. They had sent us a listing of questions, and really it was a deep dive into our financial statements. And during last week, Brian filled out the majority of it. I put in some economic information, then, other operations information too. We had a phone call that was approximately an hour long that was essentially an interview of our financial statements and our financial position. We provided to S&P our audited financial statements, our ASBR that is current but unaudited at this time, and of course all of our budget documents. So with that, they reviewed everything, and we were able to maintain, or as we say, sustain, that AAA credit rating.
That's the highest.
Yes, it is.
Applying, right?
And only 3 other school districts in the state of Missouri hold that same credit rating.
Thank you, Patty. That's awesome.
You're welcome.
And good work on the fund balance, too. I know we have a policy to add at least a quarter point to that every year, and it was gratifying to see that growing. We were really happy years ago when we were close to 30%, and I don't know if we'll get that close, but we certainly want to get above the 20%, and it looks like you're working to get there in the next couple of years.
We certainly are. And while it takes a person as myself or Brian to give guides and goals, it really takes every employee to look at that best price for services and for supplies and full utilization of our resources and such too. So the old goal 6 is the new goal 3. So certainly efficiency and effectiveness of resources, we are living it, because certainly our revenues, as you saw, didn't really meet our targets. So.
You are testing the board members, changing the goal numbers.
Kind of like the orange is the new black, 3 is the new 3, or 3 is the new 6. All right.
All right, Patty, thank you
Well,
very
thank
much. Before we go to 15.0 and Desi, do we have some students in the back here? No? Okay, saw you taking, thought maybe you might be students from one of the colleges, and we like. So which college are you from? Lindenwood? Well, congratulations on your studies, and we welcome you here.
Have you been students of Lisa Meredith? No? No? Oh, okay.
All right, well, thank you. Desi, 15.0, our work session.
Thank you, President Jacob, Vice President Dr. Sorrentino, board members, Dr. Marty. This actually changed to a work session. Originally, it was a report. But because of the ongoing work we're doing in our goal areas, and Patty is working under the premise, as she said, of goal 3 as being the old goal 6, not formalized yet and not approved, but we're working towards that with a few work sessions. But I will say, just in listening to Patty, I'm glad she's the one up here explaining all those numbers, so thank you, Patty, for that. So again, work session, and I think part of what we want to do with these times, we learned a little bit, especially at our last board retreat in June, that we want to make sure that we involve the board members as often as possible in providing feedback. So last year, we kind of got the green light to move forward in our planning, but as often as we can, we wanted to touch base and continue to get feedback from our Board of Education. So that's what tonight is really all about. But before we dive into our work, I'm going to go a little bit old school. So I was issued tablets. Actually, thinking back, maybe my grade school days, we were ahead of our time, and so we had 1-to-1. So, but I'm going to give you the tablets that we had to work on. That's why your chalk is out.
Desi, is this what we write our complaints on?
That's much too large. So on that board, I have one little task for you, and that is to think about what your hope are, what your hope of Project Parkway, or what your hope in the world, or what your dreams might be. So I know it's tough. Actually, the chalk works best if you kind of use the edge of it, so don't try to go straight with it. You got a new piece there. So, but on there, if you could, when we're going to ask you to share those a little bit later. So you just think about drafting what is your hope?
Hope out of Project Parkway.
Or you know what? It can be anything you want. We'll just leave it at that. One simple question. What is your hope?
What is my hope?
This is hard. This is hard.
Desi told me I write better with chalk.
Well, look at where that bar is. I did this once too.
No comment, Dr. Marty. Actually, he does have fine penmanship when it comes to the chalkboard. Not sure what happens when it transfers to note paper.
You didn't give me an eraser.
I know, that's what I was going to say.
I think they're,
You have to use your sleeve. Speaking of erasers, I used to, one of my jobs in grade school was, I think it was just to get me out of the classroom for a little bit, was to often go clean the erasers. So I was kind of the guy who had to go outside the classroom and slam them together.
There we go.
Okay, so we'll come back to that in just a bit. So looking at Project Parkway 2.0, as Dee and Sam mentioned, we started a while back with our first iteration of Project Parkway in 2009 is when we first really started to dive into this work. And one of the first things that we had to do is work backward from mission. That was part of under the advisement of Dr. Grant Wiggins at that time. It's who we were working with as our consultant, and actually who we model our curriculum frameworks around, understanding by design, so planning backwards. So naturally, it made sense to plan backwards for mission. So what are we in the business of doing? And if you remember, our Parkway mission was to reach and teach each student, all students every day together. Really what came out of that was about the adult work. And so we continued to draft a mission and write our strategic plan under Project Parkway based on students in mind. And so in 2011, so think about that. It was a 2-year process that we finally adopted the new mission of Parkway, which was to ensure all students were capable, curious, confident learners who understand and respond to the challenges of an ever-changing world. That mission has certainly served us well. Dr. Sorrentino mentioned we've done many, many new initiatives. It has driven what we've written in our goals and how we operate, and it is often quoted in our organization, and it's in our classroom walls. It's been quoted, and all of you have heard it, quoted at graduations. So our students are familiar with the language of our mission and the work and how it drives what we do. Last year, we started to relook. Now, the other thing Dr. Sorrentino said earlier was he appreciated the way it wasn't a plan on a shelf. It was something we continually monitored. We kept the steering committee going, had advisement all along the way. We did make adjustments to some of our goal areas, and it drove what task force and action teams we would have. So it's important work. So this year, as we started to look at any changes, it had been a 5-year look since we really, really got the community engaged in action. So in order to re-engage the community, we worked with the steering committee and went on our next year. From the onset, the listening tour was an effort to gain insight for our strategic plan, to write our goals and what we think would be those measurements or key indicators of success. But something happened along the way. We had input in a different way that made us re-looking at our mission. So after hearing from over 1,100 people and recording our key findings, And also, along with a community survey that had over 1,500 respondents, we started asking questions, and 2 of those questions included, should we consider each in our mission statement as opposed to all? And one of the other recommendations that came out of the work was, should we consider adding caring to our mission statement? In your packet that you were passed down, you do have our current mission that you approved last June, and also the work of our key findings. You'll also have a version of the goals and measurable objectives that we had been working with the last 5 years and what our action teams have developed on. So using these themes that emerged from the listening tour, we did end up deciding, and the board voted and approved, to add each to the mission statement. The other major change to our updated mission statement was adding the word caring. And actually, that's probably had more of an impact than I had known. I've seen it already in our schools, in our classrooms, in our back-to-school meetings, and the reference to the work we do, and just a couple examples of that. Now, this was a student who wrote something on the wall. It's a quote from Dr. Seuss, but just the power of caring. It says, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. And so that was written by a student in a wall at Highcroft. And then just a couple of other examples that I've seen as I walk, that just examples of the concept of caring. If you look at the one hanging outside one of our classroom walls at Sorrento, it says, yes, you are scientists, you're explorers, you are important, you are loved, you are respected, you are a friend, and you are the reason we are here. Most recently, Ron Ramspot put out his newsletter, and you can see the health and PE curriculum. The title of it, it's simple, we care. So it's having its impact very, very quickly in our organization. Not that it was absent ever before, but it's just so present and in front of us all the time right now. So, looking at what is your hope, this is probably another fine example, and hopefully you've all had a chance to see this along with about 3 other million viewers. We're going to go ahead and show it tonight.
Where are the tissues? I told you. Didn't listen.
So just an outstanding, productive, an example of caring. Now I'm going to ask the board to share what their hopes might be. And I'll start with Dr. Marty, and we'll move from my right to left.
I've only done this about 10 times, I think. So
Are your hopes still the same?
I keep adding it. My hope is that each student feels safe at school and each student grows with confidence and academically.
My hope is that my hope is that our work continues to move forward and not backwards.
Thank you.
That we continue to focus on the needs of each student.
I hope that Project Parkway 2 will help students meet and know their future.
Thank you.
All students will grow academically and be highly successful and grow as a person of character.
Excellent, thank you.
I'm going to take a second. So caring, we added, and really that means a lot to the board. And I'm not going to speak on behalf of the board, but as a board member, you know, we have to think for each and every student. And as you were mentioning, we say each or all. With that in mind, you know, with the things happening, I want to make sure that safety and security for each and every student is secured. I mean, it's there so that everybody feels safe and secure, and we all feel loved. Because we want to make sure everybody's included. We want to make sure everybody's safe.
Thank you. Kim?
Mine is students are prepared for the real world in work and community.
All right, thank you.
And my hope is for each student to be a success in their own way.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you guys for sharing, appreciate that. So I think that we're in the business of hope. I think that's what our schools and our community is doing, and in evidence by caring for each other and caring about the work we do. So moving forward, as we do plan and hopefully fulfill all the hopes that you have written down and go beyond that, we know when we develop that mission, adding caring, that's our foundation. That's kind of where you were going with that. That is the foundation of our work, and so everything we build, we want to vet it back against our mission statement and the words that we use. So as we started to do this, we did want to take a look back, and in your packet there, you'll have the goals 1 through 6, our current really working goals and measurable objectives. So I just want to give a quick update from our last Project Parkway, our steering committee. One of the first things we did is revisit all those with the group there to kind of give an update and an overview of the work that has been done. So there were presentations made by various goal leaders, and all the steering committee was able to get kind of an overview of what we've accomplished and all the measurable objectives and where we are in progress on those. And then the next step was to say, okay, there's where we are, now what do we need to do to move forward? And we started again with one of our questions from our listening tour. What do our learners need to have? What resources? What should the staff have? But what should our students have in the year 2028? That would be when our first graders walk across the stage. And so if you could click on that, and hopefully you'll be able to see it. If we need to, we might enlarge that. Thank you. So will those trends all be accurate? Who knows, honestly. But I think the questions at the end are very strong questions to consider as we look towards setting goals for 2028. So actually, what does this kind of work mean for our goals? And as we mentioned earlier, maybe it's an efficiency move, but condensing the goals to 3 main areas of focus: one on students, one on our staff, and one on our resources. Tonight, we really want to focus our work session around goal 1 tonight, our students, because we're going to set up work sessions for future instead of report outs. Since we're still in the developing stages of goals and measurable objectives, we'd like to set the next, instead of reports for goal 2 and 3, we'd like to continue to have work sessions with the board in the future. So tonight, our focus will be on our student goal. And we'll get a quick overview of the other 2, but basically focus on our students. So we want to look at accountability. In just a second, Dr. Watson and Dr. Meredith are going to join me to explain some of the work they've done with you and beyond that since our last board work session. So really, we want to share our data and tell our stories. We want to operate under a blended model because we know that it's going to be more than an ACT or test score that our kids are going to need in the future, just based on the way trends are going. They do now. So we want to know, what about Parkway has that value added? That doesn't mean abandoning traditional indicators. As a matter of fact, I think we're looking for a higher level of accountability by including and looking for different measurements and unique ways to measure other things than just the academic skills. That goes beyond. So at our August steering committee, we did several work sessions around our different goals, and we asked them for feedback on each one: our goals, our measurable objectives, what our indicators of success would be under each goal. We took those initial thoughts and suggestions, and people have worked to incorporate those ideas into some of what you will see tonight and some of what you will see in future work sessions. As you know, that you've seen our kind of working placemat in the past, and it's important to reiterate that once we set and establish the mission and the goals, that drives our operational work. So that starts to drive what we set aside as our action teams, our task force, and the work that lies ahead. So we're gonna come back to this one in just a second, the students. Very quickly though, our staff goal, I'm gonna just share with you the current working measurable objectives. And again, Amy Joyce will take you through a work session at an upcoming board meeting. But partly this is goal 4 and 5 merged, so some of the measurable objectives will be very much the same. This one would state that all employees will be effective in their roles as measured by Parkway's evaluation models. The second one is the diversity of our teachers and administrators and supervisors will mirror that of our students in all departments, programs, and schools. The third measurable objective, that administrator and teacher retention will remain above the state and national average. And the last measurable objective in that category is all staff members will engage in professional learning that supports and impacts Parkway's diverse student population. And to some extent, those will sound probably very familiar and look similar to the measurable objectives that you've seen in the past under goal 4 and 5. As far as resources go, and Patty Bedborough and team will lead a work session for this group in a future board meeting. The resource goals or measurable objectives would indicate that each school, department, and program will maintain ethical and fiscally responsible practice to effectively accomplish mission. The second measurable objective, all personnel, time, and resources will be allocated responsibly and flexibly based on mission-related needs of the students and the financial reality of the district, which sounded pretty promising tonight, so thanks, Patty. And then each school and department and program will successfully integrate environmentally, socially, and fiscally sustainable practices into their areas of focus. And again, Patty's already been working with her team and the operations group to continue to develop. So what does that look like? If we're going to measure these things, what will be the key indicators? And she will be doing a work session at an upcoming board meeting as well. So bringing us to tonight's focus and turning this into that work session that we want to do. Our focus will be on goal 1 and our students. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Meredith and Dr. Watson.
Is it arrows here?
Yep.
Good evening. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share with you where our current thinking is as we are working on drafting new Goal 1 of Project Parkway 2.0. We will, just to give you a glimpse, we will share where our thinking is tonight based on several work sessions, and then we will take feedback and we will bring back to you a final proposal in November. So your feedback tonight is part of our crafting process yet, so we're really looking forward to getting your feedback. So since June, where have we been? Was it June that we had board retreat, and you gave us the nod to move ahead with one goal, combining our work to really focus on students, and we've done a lot of work since June.
And so since June, we have continued to meet collaboratively as a TLA and Student Services team. I remember specifically Dr. Marty gave us a number of expectations when we were hired, but one was to be joined at the hip. And so I think we had a little difficulty for 4 years really being joined at the hip, but now you cannot pull us apart because the work that we have been doing side by side, collaboratively, during the day, over the weekend on the phone, at night on the phone, thanks to Google Docs, we have really thought strategically about the work that our two departments do, and realize that we have to mesh our work for the benefit of our students. So because of that and the feedback that we've received, we've had a number of meetings collaboratively. We have had a number of revisions of the goal and the measurable objectives, and some amazing thinking and feedback from members of the Student Services team, TLA team, Project Parkway Steering, building administrators, APM this week, and now the feedback from you all today. So as it stands, Goal 1 reads, Parkway students are learners who positively engage in an ever-changing world. Parkway students are learners who positively engage in an ever-changing world. The measurable objectives, as of right now, each student will ask and pursue meaningful questions. Each student will transfer learning to new situations in and out of school. Each student will seek to understand the views, values, and cultures of others. Each student will set, adjust, and achieve goals to pursue a personal direction. Each student will be kind and display concern for the well-being of self and others. And you see some things highlighted there. And these highlights show changes since the Project Steering Committee. And since we had open sessions inviting building administrators, we had 2 sessions inviting building administrators to give feedback. And since the APM meetings.
So one of the things you might notice with some of the measurable objectives is they are vision statements. And we had great in-depth conversation among our team of whether or not a vision statement can be a measurable objective. And we settled on our vision statements are preceded with, we know we are successful when, and if we have not been able to demonstrate and measure that we are successful on a vision statement, then that would mean maybe it should rise to the level of a measurable objective so that it drives and helps prioritize our work in the next iteration of our strategic plan. So some of the language may sound familiar, and that is why.
I wanted to add, the sheet that I think you all have that lists some of the outcomes from the listening tour. You don't have that one? Okay. If you don't have it today, I know you've seen it a million times.
Yes, that.
So, as I said, we went through lots of versions of the measurable objectives. And that was an artifact, of course. That was information that we utilized amongst all of the data. You remember Desi with the picture, on top of the data. But as we landed here and we kept going back to what we heard, if you look at that document based on what the community said to us, it goes back to what Lisa said a few minutes ago about our vision statements. I think there also was some recognition that some of the things in our vision did not rise to the elevation that our community wanted to see, and that spoke volumes to us as we continued looking through this work.
So after we landed on these measurable objectives, TLA and Student Services worked together to begin, how would we measure these? And some of you who were here during the development of Project Parkway 1.0, we often asked, how do you measure that? And Grant would tell us, you can measure anything. And so we put the team to work. They did a lot of brainstorming. We had this immense sheet, Google Sheet, of all kinds of ideas of how we could measure it. And we decided we needed to narrow our team. And so we asked a group of Student Services and TLA members to come together. I think we had 6. And they spent some time doing some work for us, trying to synthesize and make sense of all of that. And that's what we want to present tonight. And we actually have a couple of the team members here who are going to help us. So in that work, we really looked at a dual measurement system, which you heard Dr. Kirchhoffer talk about a couple of minutes ago. So we looked at system measures. These would be measures that we would collect regardless of what our mission is. Good school districts across the state of Missouri collect these. Good school districts across the United States collect things like these. And we will continue to collect those. Those are measures of our system. And so you'll notice those on your left-hand side of your sheet that Nikki just passed down to you. And we're actually going to invite Nathan and Kevin to come up. They served on the small team. And there are some very specific changes within some of these system measures. And Chelsea and I were on the outskirts of this conversation, and we want to make sure that it's represented accurately of how the team came about that. So Kevin and Nathan, if you want to come talk about some of the changes and additions to the system measures.
And Michael, you are here, so if you want to join, please make sure your voice is heard.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about some of these system measures, and we'll just highlight a few things so that we're aware of what some of those changes are. We did separate on that left-hand side the tool and the measure. In our previous plan, we just named, we want our ACT score to rise. Here we're saying, on the ACT, here are some of the things we want, and we have additions like being clear that we want all students to score at or above the national average, and our district composite rising to 24. You probably remember our previous plan asked for a 25, which we know when we test all students. That's just a very, very challenging goal. We think 24 is still a challenging goal, given that our students just achieved 23.3, which was our highest since 2012. Moving that up another 0.7 of a point would be quite a move, and something certainly to celebrate. So naming that as our new ACT objective. We did add under AP and dual credit, not just that we want all students to score a 3 or higher, which is the same goal that was the same objective that was in our previous plan, but also that we want to continue to increase the number of students participating in those dual credit and AP exam opportunities. Not only the students taking them, but continue to have more and more students taking rigorous courses and earning that credit as part of their high school experience. We also did name explicitly Parkway benchmarks at each of our levels. Our previous plan was quite heavy on high school measures, ACT, AP, post-secondary attendance, but we also want to make sure that we're making progress before we get to the high school level. So we want for example, our 6th graders leaving 5th grade and going to 6th grade reading on grade level. We want our kindergartners leaving preschool, coming into kindergarten ready. We want our 8th graders as they graduate into high school to be reading on grade level, meeting math benchmarks, and setting those things so that we know that we're making progress along the way, not just once they get to high school. And then we also know that on the graduate exit survey, this is a repeat from before, but we know we'll also have to modify some of the questions on that graduate exit survey to make sure that we're fully reflecting the measures that we have. And I will also ask my esteemed colleagues if I'm missing anything on the left-hand side that we might have adjusted since we met last. No one's saying anything, so I'm going to assume that that's it. Do we have any questions about those system indicators on the left-hand side? Great. Oh.
A question or a comment, but it talks about these indicators, but where do we, how do we reach students with disabilities, kids with IEPs, kids with 504s? I mean, we're seeing the expectations grow for AP, for making higher SAT, ACT. What about these kids?
So thank you for the question. So a couple of comments with that. One, we're going to give you an opportunity in a minute to do a question storming and help surface questions like that will help us get clarity, because maybe we need to get some clarity around if we truly mean each, how do we make sure that our system measures are about each? So jot that down so you don't forget, because we'll want you to record that, Debbie. Just a side note with this, one of the things that has changed with ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act, which replaced No Child Left Behind, is that all IEPs now have to be written to grade level standard. So that change will be a lever for us as we begin to move forward, but we know we'll have to continue to evaluate our instructional practices to ensure that we get there. But make sure you get that question, because we're going to have you get up here in a minute and help us generate questions just like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Student growth. Thank you. I'm going to give you a Post-it. So we've talked about the left side of this sheet of paper with those system-wide indicators. And so we also have some mission-related indicators. And so Desi already mentioned value added. You know, what sets the Parkway School District above and beyond the other school districts in St. Louis County? Even though my kids go to another one, I'm pledge my allegiance here to the Parkway School District. But we do things above and beyond other school districts in St. Louis County. So as we think about that value added, we thought, in addition to the system-wide indicators, what does that look like? What does that look like for our students? What does that look like as we think about reporting out to our community what we do in Parkway that benefits our students as they think about our mission and after they leave the Parkway School District? So on the right-hand side, you see specifics on how we will measure our work based on our Parkway mission. And so we have a video. Now, our videos may not be as exciting as the videos that Desi shared with you.
No tissues needed.
No tissues needed. Maybe a thinking cap right now, put your thinking cap on. And so we have a little video, and then one of our esteemed data administrators will come back and join you all here at the mic.
Now that we have a good idea of why we might want to sample and why it's important for our sample to be representative of the population, let's discuss some sampling methods, namely a simple random sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling, and multi-stage sampling. In simple random sampling, we randomly select cases from the population such that each case is equally likely to be selected. This is similar to randomly drawing names from a hat. In stratified sampling, we first divide the population into homogeneous groups called strata, and then randomly sample from within each strata. For example, if we wanted to make sure both genders are equally represented in a study, we might divide the population first into males and females, and then randomly sample from within each group. In cluster sampling, we divide the population into clusters, randomly sample a few clusters, and then sample all observations within these clusters. The clusters, unlike strata and stratified sampling, are heterogeneous within themselves, and each cluster is similar to another, such that we can get away with just sampling from a few of the clusters. Lastly, multi-state sampling adds another step to cluster sampling. Just like in cluster sampling, we divide the population into clusters, randomly sample a few clusters, and then we randomly sample observations from within these clusters. Usually, we use cluster sampling and multi-state sampling for economical reasons. For example, one might divide a city into geographic regions that are on average similar to each other, and then sample randomly a few of these regions, go to these randomly picked regions, and then sample a few people from within these regions. This avoids the need to travel to all of the regions in the city.
Big words, lots of them. I know that was thrilling stuff, but let me tell you where we're coming from with this idea.
I could have used a tissue.
Yeah, you could use a tissue. Different reason, though, I'm sure. Yeah. So when we started thinking about, so how do we know that students are asking and pursuing meaningful questions, or that they're transferring their learning to situations potentially outside of school, or that they're setting and adjusting their own goals, those are obviously the ones that are much more difficult to measure directly. So we began by trying to do the things that we largely did in our past plan, which is identify existing measures that might potentially show us that kids are doing those things and sort of get an indirect sense of whether they're happening. So we started naming things like, could we look at these questions from the character survey and tell if kids are being kind and showing concern for others? In the end, that felt like we're really stretching to measure a lot of those things, and we're trying to do it very indirectly. And so as a group, we decided, what if we instead just go straight to our kids and actually ask them questions directly about these things that we want them doing? Then we ran into some questions of, well, we have 17,000 students, like that's not really possible. And that's where the idea of, well, what if we sampled our students? And what if we came up with a representative random sample of our students, however we do that. This is a well-accepted, data statistical practice. If you've ever cooked anything, you probably know about sampling because you're cooking something and then you stir it and you don't have to taste every bit of what's in the pot to know if it's ready. You just taste a small portion and you get a sense of, yes, okay, this food is ready or it's not. That's the same idea with sampling. Provided that you stir it first, meaning I get a representative sample of what's all in this pot, not just you take it out of the microwave and the top is hot and the bottom's cold, right? Stir it up, make sure you're getting a random sample of what's going on, and actually go out and talk to our kids and do a survey with them and see, are these things actually happening? And by doing that over multiple years, we can get a sense of, are we making progress in our system towards each of our kids doing these things? We don't know what our baseline would be yet because we've never done something like this. It's quite a different way to approach it. So we would certainly have to create that. We would certainly have to do a lot of really good scientific approach to that, like make sure that the people who are talking to our kids are well trained on the process and what they're doing. But in doing so, we wouldn't have to talk to all 17,000 students, but could talk to a more representative sample of our students and see if in fact they're doing these things. We also consider potentially just doing a survey. The problem that you have with surveys is a thing called response bias, which you guys know, like I got the survey and I totally didn't respond, right? My personal client survey last year, I got 4 responses. They were super great, but not representative of the people that I work with. Right? They were only representative of the people who chose to respond to that survey. So we are presenting the idea of potentially sampling our students, but trying to do it in a much more thorough way where we don't just ask them questions, but then actually follow up with them. So for example, ask and pursues meaningful questions. We could ask them on a survey, this describes me all the way to this doesn't describe me, but then we want to talk to them. Okay, well, tell us about the question that you're pursuing. And then if they can't, that's an additional piece of information to tell us, okay, you might have answered yes, but we don't have the evidence to really support that. So that's currently the proposal under mission indicators and how we might actually go about sampling and measuring whether we're making progress towards those more difficult to measure pieces that might not show up through MSIP or AP or ACT or Parkway benchmarks or the other traditional measures that we have.
Can I say a few?
Yes.
So I agree with Kevin. I mean, when we talk about our big, gigantic population of students, which is about 17,500, you can take a random sample, and they have these sample size calculators that you can actually plug in, like what's the margin of error that you're willing to live with? Typically that's about 5%. What's your confidence level that you're willing or okay to have? And that's typically about 95%. If you put in our 17,500 students, really, if we randomly select 376 students in Parkway, we can then go ahead and generalize to the broader population. Now, 376 still is a lot of students, so we would need like a team of folks who are trained in whatever kind of tool that we use, where maybe it's a structured interview type scenario, but train all those folks, make sure that, you know, when they score an interview, that they're all being consistent. That's called inter-rater reliability. So there's a few little statistical things that we would want to do to make sure that this is a meaningful and sort of scientific, objective approach to this. And certainly the sample is important. So whether or not we use one of the techniques that were shown in that thrilling video, or maybe even just try, randomizing the 17,000 first and make sure that, okay, we have, our races are representative of the proportions that we currently have in Parkway. For example, we have 15% African American students in our student body. Pull a random sample, make sure that we have 15% African American students there. And actually, students with IEPs, it's the same thing, about 15%. So again, we'd want, if we pulled that sample, make sure that we're matching up our proportions of those groups that we want to make sure so that we are, in fact, hitting all the demographics that we need to hit. So I just wanted to go ahead and mention those couple of things. And I think, one of the great things about this approach is it's not indirect. And it really, the credit needs to go to Kevin, but then the small team really rallied behind it, because we're looking specifically at what are these measurable objectives and how can we specifically find out about them versus trying to just guess through, okay, does the ACT tell us whether or not kids are asking meaningful questions? Maybe it does, but is there a way to make sure that we're sort of cutting through the noise and asking really what we want the answers to? So, thanks.
Say that the day that the team met, we really didn't know what they were gonna, come out of the basement with. And Michael ran upstairs and said, "We need you downstairs for just 5 minutes." And I really didn't even know where they were meeting because they hadn't told us. I said, "Where? Downstairs? What are you doing?" They were meeting. So 5 minutes turned into an hour and a half, as took me a minute just to process what they were saying and think about all of the feedback, as Lisa talked about, those sheets. And if you were at the Project Parkway steering, we pulled it up just a little bit, and you saw lists and lists and lists and ideas underneath each measurable objective. And as we started looking at the feedback from the steering committee and the other groups, it was, yeah, it looks like you're gonna have to create a new tool to measure that. And it looks like you're gonna have to create a new survey to maybe measure that. And it looks like, well, you might not be able to measure it with one survey, so you might have to create this and this. And then it was, how many additional tools are we going to create to then try to figure out if we were actually meeting the measurable objectives? And so I asked quite a bit of questions when I was down there, and probably looked a little puzzled a couple of times as I thought through, and I was able to really think and process as I saw the feedback, again, remembered what our citizens and our community told us. This started making very good sense about how we go above and beyond what we already do, and that what we already value, and what we already report, and what we will closely monitor and pay attention to, just like we always have.
So with that, we would like to get some feedback from you. We need your help. This has been, you're one of the first groups who have seen this actual proposal. So we had two groups of building leaders who came in and met with Chelsea and I and gave us feedback. And then Kevin shared it with his assessment and progress monitoring action team this past Tuesday. So we're still trying to get feedback on this. So what we'd like to do now is a question storming. So in front of you, you will see some sticky notes. And so we'd like for you to take a moment and write down any questions that you have regarding what we just presented to you. And we would like one question on each sticky note. Does that make sense? So if you have 5 questions, you're going to have 5 different sticky notes. So if you just quickly jot down the questions that came to mind as you were listening to Chelsea, Nathan, Kevin, or myself talk about this.
And you will be sharing your questions with 3 or 4 others based on an activity that we're going to have. You all do. Maybe wrap up your final question. I know some of you are still writing quite a bit, but if you could finish up maybe in the next 30, 40 seconds?
Okay, so we're going to break you into small groups now. So we're going to start, Debbie, if you would start, and we're going to have you count off by threes. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay.
2.
So if the ones would take your sticky notes and go stand by that easel, the twos, the middle easel, and the threes, the far easel, and then we'll give you your next direction once you're there.
Okay, your next task is to share your questions and group them. So once you share your questions, see if you can cluster the questions, see if there are any themed or questions that are alike. After you do that, you are going to work with your group and you are going to come up with the 2 or 3 most pressing questions. You might reword the questions on your Post-its. You have markers on the floor. So once you cluster your questions on this piece of chart paper, rip that off, put it on the floor, and then write 2 or 3 questions that you think are of most importance based on your conversation. I hope everyone was listening to their task. If you have questions, just let me know.
Okay, are we about ready? Okay. Okay, I think we are all done. And so I think this group right here wants to start. You all are going to share your questions out loud so everyone can hear the thoughts. Okay. First question, how are we planning to address individual student needs while ensuring that all student subgroups are fairly represented? Second question, how can we ensure survey data is objective? Third question, how do we set a baseline and a target? And then we added a last minute fourth question, we do so many surveys, will we plan to combine some of them?
That's a good one, actually.
We have 3 questions. Number 1, how do we more effectively measure the preparation and success of all graduates? 2, what is the methodology for structured interviews? What time of year is best? What artifacts can be included? Should it include staff and parents? And 3, what do we do when kids meet, exceed, or do not meet the expected district benchmarks?
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, we basically stated, is each student making expected academic progress in each subject to be prepared for the next grade level? Secondly, how are students supported if they are not meeting the expected classroom learning objectives? And how do we help all students practice civility? Where's our audience?
Where's the crowd?
Thank you for hanging in there and participating with us. We will definitely take the charts that you have, but also Nikki collected for us the sheets with your individual stickies on them. And we will, as a student services and TLA team, study all of your question and feedback. But before we wrap this up this evening, time to share, you guys already did that, moving on. Just want to open it up for open conversation if things, if hearing the other groups share their questions sparked another thought or another question for you. We most likely won't have answers for your questions this evening because we'll need to go back and study those, but we do want to give you an opportunity to have conversation.
How do we help our staff from getting initiative fatigue? It just seems like we're asking them to do and teach and assess and monitor so many things. I can't fathom how they can do it.
So I think that's a very valid question for us to grapple with. One of the next steps after we get measurable objectives and indicators down is to work on action steps. And if you'll remember in the old strategic plan, it was pages and pages and pages of action steps. So part of our work with that will be to prioritize the work so that we can avoid that. And I think one of the questions for us with that is, when does something become systematized? And we need to monitor and make sure that new layers aren't putting on until things are systematized. And we also need to get better at weeding. You know, are there things we're doing
That's the
right
thing is-
now
right, we
that
have
are
tendency
measures
to-
we don't need to continue to do? And as a former classroom teacher, I know I was not good at letting go of practices that were comfortable when new practices came around. So how do we help our teachers weed?
We have and you have a tendency to pile on without relieving any other responsibility.
We will work to get better at that.
We all collectively.
Will this change any of the focus of the PLC work? You don't have to answer. It just popped in my head.
It would make sense that it would when you have new measures that you're bringing to the table.
I think it's obvious that you've taken this all very, very seriously and have been very, very thorough in reviewing and going back and thinking and processing, et cetera, to make it the very best that it could be. And I think most importantly, what is very well recognized is the fact that it's a team effort. It's not any one person's responsibility, and all of you work very well together in accomplishing this as a team that will make a difference.
School administration, being such a huge school district, these are good goals. If you set them at a higher level, how are you going to cascade these goals into responsibilities that goes all the way down to the lowest level, so that everybody is accountable for their actions, so that it contributes to the success of these goals?
That's one of the things the team talked about as we, in the process to get here, as we looked at things that happened in Project Parkway 1.0. And there were a lot of things that have become systematized, but there are things that are still a work in progress and aren't systematized. And Student Services and TLA have already started a list of things that aren't quite automatic yet. And how do we not let those drop? But how do we not put too much new on at the same time? So that's good. Thank you.
I also think, to your point, is, again, when we look at our vision statements and we see the feedback and the things that bubbled up throughout the community, which then ended up taking us back to vision statements, even though we've had these vision statements for a number of years, we're being told and we see that we still have work to do, which is why some of these bubbled up to this level. So to your point.
I would just share an observation. We did, for the first time actually on Monday, at our superintendent's action team, be presented with this kind of right side concept. And so I've had a lot of time to reflect. In fact, Desi and I had a conversation. We do so much paper pencil assessment. I mean, that's still our tradition, and we don't want to lose that because a lot of it's still required. But what strikes me about the right side, and Desi and I had kind of a come to awareness from both of us, we both were in doctoral studies where we never took a paper and pencil test. Our whole doctoral program was portfolio work, interviews, presentations. It was really what this speaks to. And I'm thinking in the world we're really moving in, we think about Spark. Our Spark kids don't do a lot of tests, but they do performance. And we're talking more about competency-based. And so what really strikes me about that side is not only the process, maybe here of the 300 and how many, 76 kids we might, but I think there's an offshoot from this that we could start thinking differently about how we assess, that how we talk to the kids, how we, when we have a teacher or a candidate come to Parkway, we do some paper pencil things, we do some writing, but a lot of it is interviews. So I mean, the world that our kids are going to is more than just taking tests. It is about performance, it's about speaking, it's about sharing, reflecting, and that's what has kind of struck Desi and I as we kind of thought more about this after we first saw it the other day.
And to that point, Dr. Marty, the larger team had talked about portfolios. You know, are we at a place where we want every student to have a portfolio? And the conversation really was, do you do the interviews and the portfolios, or do we do interviews as iteration one? And does that lead us to possibly thinking about more systematized portfolios, but knowing we can't do both at the same time, and which one's going to get us the most reliable data the quickest so that we can build capacity?
That by really compressing this all down, we had 3 goals surrounding students, and now we have 1, that by compressing it, we're really now honing in on very specific details that will help each student. And we're really, I think, now finally getting to the point where we're seeing the results that we want to begin seeing with our students. So I feel like we're finally getting there in this progression of being able to really hone this down a little bit more detailed like this.
And the placemat is so much less cluttered, isn't it? That was, when I looked at that,
You know, when you think about our graduates going out into the real world, half the interview that they go through is assessing what's their capacity, what can they do, how can they cope. We'll teach them what they need to know. We wish they could come to us already knowing, but often they don't know that part of it as well. But if they can learn and if they can cope, are they team players? Those are the kind of things that make them real successful in most of the jobs that they'll have to be part of.
Well, again, thank you for enduring with Chelsea and I, representing our team. We greatly appreciate your input, and we actually have a meeting tomorrow, and we'll be processing part of this, and we really do appreciate your thinking. And with that, we're going to turn it back over to Desi.
All right, thank you, great job, nice work. So just a couple recap of things here, and then I'll conclude pretty quickly. But I'm really excited about this opportunity, and I could see that survey and interview / become part of our plan of our district assessment plan. It would make sense that it would fit into that. So tonight and now you can see why we focused on 1 goal tonight instead of trying to dive into 2 and 3 as well. So we'll get future work sessions. So that's an illustration of here. So it's September 28th, we'll focus on goal 2. October 19th, we'll focus on goal 3. We'll bring back goal 1 in November, and we'll take a look at what progress we've made and hopefully present a larger package together on November 30th with the hopes that we'll be ready for board approval for the goals, measurable objectives, and key indicators in December. Now, I say that because last year at this board meeting, I said we would hope we'd have all that approved in June of last year. So, no, it was the listening tour's fault. We took it to heart, we listened, and so all this is really developed out of those key findings that you have. So I want to keep going back to that, because while there has been a lot of department work and administrative work, this started with asking teachers, staff members, students, parents, community members questions, and taking that information. So that those 1,000 voices and those 1,500 survey responses started to generate. So it was sort of an ongoing dialogue that sparked and created this process. So kind of want to go back to that each time. Just some things to be thinking about as we talked about initiative fatigue and task force. But when we did look at our key findings, I want to go back to the healthy and active kids could be something we're looking at as a study. Personalized and flexible learning opportunities, global studies, real world problem solving, those sort of things that also emerged in those key findings. And of course, this is the weeding part that we don't do a good job necessarily of, but we're going to continue many of these other efforts and initiatives that have come out of the first iteration of Project Parkway. Just a quick update to the board, our quarterly meetings, and one was mentioned tonight already. We have Monday at South High at 6:30 on the 19th, and that focuses on character education and starting kind of that journey and look into how we become a national district of character. And then on November 14th, we're talking about having a global studies, and that's kind of in its works right now, but we have had several staff members and faculty through Parkway travel, and we also have students who have traveled into different countries and have learned. So in studying systems of education around the world, so we might have a night where what can Parkway learn about other educational systems as well. And that's a wrap. So thank you all very much. We appreciate your feedback and work tonight. Great work. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you that helped present that. I couldn't help think, Desi, when you were presenting that, did you know, my niece married a wonderful young man from India, and I always like to tell him he's one in a million, which means there's only 1,200 others just like him. Thank you very much again. Our next anticipated closed session will be held on Wednesday, September 28th, 2016 at 5:30 p.m. at Central Middle School. Details of the closed session will be posted within 24 hours of the anticipated meeting. May I have a motion and a second to adjourn the regular meeting? So moved. All in favor? Aye. The motion carries 7-0. At this time, we will adjourn to a closed